The very first video I made for this channel was about making a sensible Windows XP computer. Something small, but can do almost anything. And this is what it was, Optiplex 7010, 3rd gen i5. But I got to be thinking, how much harder would it be to do a sort of sensible overkill Windows XP computer? One that really pushes the limits of what XP can do, but still is quite cheap and easy to get. So I built it. This is a old Dell Precision T1700, and I had a few criteria I wanted to follow with this. I really wanted to have essentially the fastest CPU you can get for Windows XP gaming. Well, more or less. That would be the i5 4690. That's the Devil's Canyon refresh of Haswell. There is a K version. The 4690K is the fastest gaming CPU you can get. Remember, for XP games, we're using 2 cores at most. So this is the non-K variant, but other than that, it is about as fast as it gets. And in here, I decided to put in, it's not the fastest graphics card you can get. That would be, I guess, the GTX Titan, Maxwell Titan, or the 980 Ti. But the 960 is quite cheap on the secondary market and almost as fast. Remember, in the Sentinel machine, we ended up using a Quadro K620. So the K620 and the GTX 960 are both Maxwell-based cards, so they're kind of similar, but the GTX 960 is much more powerful. So one thing about this system is it really isn't that much more expensive than the other system. This was about $60 shipped for everything except sound and video card, and the video card was quite reasonable. So you can see the inside of a system here, and you can see the GTX 960. Now, why was it so cheap? It's the 2 gig variant. The 2 gig variant is massively going out of style, being replaced left and right. This guy cost me about $30 including shipping. You can see it barely fits in, but it does fit. I also you can kind of see another X5 Extreme Gaming inside, cost me about $22. The thing is, the precision workstations are where to go on this. The power supply in this is an 80 plus gold. It has a 6-pin connector. It has enough power to power a GTX 960 without resorting to any weird adapters. It just works. The 4690 Devil's Canyon CPU, it's not getting a ton of cooling, but the Dell cooler is beefier than Intel's default cooler. There's 8 gigs of RAM and dual channel. That is much more than we need in Windows XP, but dual channel is nice. Put it in SSD in here too, of course, fairly straightforward. Unfortunately, there's no real great way to mount the SSD. I just have it loose and it's just fine. Not a complicated system. I got the SSD in Walmart's SSD sale. It's a 256 gig one for XP games. You don't need that much space. All said and done, this cost me about $120. Quite reasonable, I think, and the tricky thing is finding a Precision or a Lenovo ThinkStation or whatever with a 4690. Other CPUs are not that much slower, but the 4690 is sort of in a spot where people don't really want it. It's 4 cores, 4 threads, but it has just about the best performance you can get in Windows XP gaming. So for most games from Windows XP era, this computer, I'm calling it the Overkill Sensible computer, and the Sensible XP computer I built earlier are very similar. The Quadro K620 is a powerful card. It's gonna have no problem with a lot of these earlier games. There's one game though where these computers are not the same on, and you can probably guess what that is. It's Crysis. I'll be honest, the Sensible XP computer handles Crysis fine. It gets 60 FPS in the test loop at medium. It runs Crysis acceptably. But if you try putting it at high, the result is really not that great on the Sensible computer. I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised at this. I really thought they'd be closer, but in Crysis, running at 1920 by 1080, all high settings, 2x anti-aliasing, getting about 30 FPS on the Sensible machine of a K620. It's about 90 on the Overkill Sensible machine. So you can see here, this is the iconic scene in Crysis where you approach the sunrise. It is about 1/3 of a performance.
I spotted KPA patrols down on the beach. Use your binocs to tag me. I see a large transmitting array. That must be the jamming station.
This is a Sensible machine. It's not even getting 30 FPS. We were getting a solid 90 on an Overkill machine. Now, by contrast, this can run Crysis on high with 2x AA and not have a problem. It gets 100 FPS in the test loop. In practice, running it, you get 90 down to 60 in really demanding areas on high with 2x AA enabled. It runs just fine. Practically, though, it runs just really nicely in a way that the Sensible computer isn't. A Sensible computer is just struggling. This one is not. And it's the physical sensation of playing Crysis, just literally playing through it. It's just a lot more fun in a way that's so hard to describe. It's seamless. You can see that it's just getting tons of frames. It's really easy to run. And the experience is really enjoyable. And it's just kind of funny to think about because Crysis came out in 2007. If you had a really great computer when Crysis came out, you were running probably the 8800 GTX, probably something like the quad-core E6850 or something. Pardon me. That was the dual core. They did have the Q6600 out at the time, the Core 2 quad, but that wasn't really for gamers. The Core 2 Duos were actually faster for gaming. You could overclock them more, with more headroom, etc. Now, the GTX 960, even with 2GB version we're running, that's about 5 times faster according to user benchmark. I know it's not reliable entirely, but you needed a card that's 5 times faster than the card which was at the time a revolution in performance to run Crysis on high at 1080p. Admittedly, most people weren't running 1080p at the time either, but still, it really is crazy just how ahead of its time Crysis was in its demands. And you can see it here. I mean, it looks beautiful, but the hardware to run this literally wouldn't come out until 2014. I know you could technically get something like a 680 or 690 or a 780 Ti, which will also run it well. But even so, getting this sort of performance on a single 6-pin power adapter, you have to wait until 2014 to get it. So it was mostly easy to install Windows XP on. The Devil's Canyon Haswell refresh is, still has XP drivers mostly. Precision T1700 is at the very edge of XP compatibility, though. Most of this stuff loaded right up. You see most things were doable. Network adapters were a problem. There is no network driver for the actual network Ethernet adapter that's in here. The only way to really do it is actually to hack an INF file, and then it works. So it turns out it's basically the same thing as an earlier driver. Also, there's a bunch of stuff going on here. For the system's internal audio cards, I'm not really using inside the XFi. The driver is not on the computer's website, but if you look it up, you'll find it. Everything else, Snappy driver installer Origin got, except for these and the video card. But the GTX 960 has Windows XP drivers on NVIDIA's website. No need to hack anything. It just works. So all said and done, it was pretty simple to install. Not entirely, but mostly. So, this is a selection of 3 short gameplay videos from Crysis that I made. The first one is one that pretty much everyone knows it's where you go and see the sunlight, the first light scene. Like I said, this is running at 1080p, everything's on high, 2xAA. It's getting about 90 pretty continuously here. Yeah, it really looks beautiful. There was no way you were going to get this back in the day. It's almost revisionist history to play it like this, but it runs just fine. And, you know, this is with a 2 gigabyte GTX 960, so, you know, like I said, about a $30 card. What's sort of cool here is, like I said, it's really only for this game. Almost anything else from the XP era is going to be pretty easy to run on anything. But, you know, for this particular game, having this kind of hardware is very nice. So the second clip I'm going to show after this is the level which is notorious, and that's going to be Ascension, and that's going to be coming up in a second. So Ascension does not run well on anything. I was kind of shocked. If you run this without the Ascension fix, even with the Devil's Canyon GTX 960 and a you know, i5 4690, you still only get about 45 frames per second doing this. Now, if you make for one change of doing the Ascension fix, you're back up to 70 to 80 FPS. Even so, it's bizarre that on a 2014, yeah, don't mind my bad flying, it still runs poorly. So the last thing I'm going to play for you is a clip of a regular random scene. This is all with the software environmental effects. The next clip is you can enable hardware EAX in the controls, and I'm going to do that right now.
Stand by for extraction once you've located the hostages. Good luck, son. Listen up, Marines! We're gonna dig in and hold this perimeter! Defensive positions! Let's go, let's go! You're a one-man army, Nomad! We'll take it from here!
So then, final question. Is it worth it, or should you stick with a sensible XP machine? Or something like that. You know, a sensible machine is meant to be sensible for most people. Truth be told, though, this machine is not that much more expensive. It is a little bigger, although the mid-tower of Dell cells is not huge. It's not that insensible, to be honest. Nobody wants the 2 gigabyte GTX 960 anymore. You can get it online for $30. A Dell Precision that has the i5 4690 is actually hard to find. There are a lot of 4690 machines on the internet. A lot of people haven't accepted that a 4-core, 4-thread processor is only really of interest for retro enthusiasts these days. A lot of them are too high. I paid $60 for the workstation. Of course, it includes the power supply. It included everything, including memory, except for storage. $60, including shipping, is about what you should be paying for a machine like that. You shouldn't be paying much more than that. If you can get a K variant, maybe pay a few more, but that's about it. All in all, this system costs $10 to $20 more than the sensible build. Because the GTX 960 2 gigabyte is so cheap now, if you can get the right machine that has a 6-pin connector, and I think that's really key. You want to get a workstation that has that 6-pin connector. You don't want to have to replace the power supply. Then you're dealing with something much more expensive. But something that has a power in it to run a card with a single 6-pin connector, I say if you're running XP, do that and get GTX 960 2 gigabytes. This practically, it's really not that much more expensive at all, and knowing that you can run even Crysis on high, which is the highest you can do, to run very high, you have to be using Vista. DirectX 9 tops out at high-end Crysis. To run it 1080p high, this card can actually do it, and you can run it in a mid-tier machine like this without running a ton of power like you needed in a coupler card or something. I honestly say just get it. Get a GTX 960 2 gigabytes, get an old workstation with a Haswell or ideally a Devil's Canyon i5, and have fun.